Hi. If you fly IFR to the UK and are going to remain within the controlled IFR structure, in other words, are going to land at an airport within Class D airspace, which is connected to the route system, you'll not notice much difference from anywhere else in the world. But these videos are aimed at GA pilots flying light aircraft, and generally you're going to fly in the UK to an airfield that's not connected to the route structure. If you are, you need to watch the first two videos in this sequence, airspace and ATS services, before you watch this one. The links are below. Unlike in your home country, you're likely to be dropped out of controlled airspace without warning and without any help being offered about what to do next. We even have an expression for it. We call it dumped at Detling. Detling being a VOR southeast of the complex London airspace, where controllers notoriously dump us out into uncontrolled airspace to fend for ourselves. One of the principal reasons for this difference is that in the UK, we have extensive Class G airspace and can fly under IFR throughout this without any limitations. We don't need to file a plan, we don't need a clearance, we don't need a radar service, we don't even need to talk on the radio. If we wish, we can literally take off from our own field in the south of England in 400 metres visibility with cloud on the ground, fly to the north of Scotland and land in our other field in equally bad weather without asking or telling anyone, provided we stay outside controlled airspace. Indeed, we can be in VMC on a beautiful clear day, but if we follow the instrument flight rules by remaining more than 1,000 feet above anything within 8 kilometres, then we can tell ourselves we're IFR, we can log it as IFR, it counts towards any rating or qualification that needs IFR hours. Being IFR is just a state of mind. There are definitely some great freedoms and advantages to flying in the UK, but the thing is, all that means that we don't have the concept of terminating our relationship with the IFR controller by cancelling IFR. In Germany, for example, you have the responsibility of the IFR system until you choose to cancel IFR, and they can't cancel it for you. You cancel when you're ready, either because you see your destination or because the route to your destination is clear and obvious. In the UK, we normally don't cancel IFR. The end of our relationship with the controller is when we leave controlled airspace, normally in descent, but it can be laterally. In practice, ATC sometimes appears to chuck us out of the system with the phrase, "my service terminates," but you still remain IFR, often without any radar service. And once we're out, we're out. If we want to go back in, we need an explicit clearance. This requirement really affects us in 3 ways. The first being particularly important to the pilot visiting from the south, say on low-level IFR with Lille, Deauville or Brest, since in some areas there is a mismatch between the base of controlled airspace at the boundary between France and the UK. You may find yourself entering the UK outside controlled airspace below the level of the IFR network. You may be told by the French IFR controller to contact London Information. You might think that you're in a controlled IFR environment and expect to remain that way. That would be the way it would work everywhere else in Europe, right? But no, you've left controlled airspace, and the potential trap is that the base of controlled airspace starts descending again as you get closer to the UK. Depending on your level, you may not have much time to either negotiate a clearance to re-enter or to start descending to avoid an infringement. You might get a clearance from London Information if you're quick, but you may not have time. London Information cannot issue a clearance directly. They must communicate internally with the relevant sector controller who is located elsewhere in the London Area Control Centre. This may take a few minutes or longer if the relevant sector is busy. And if you don't get a new IFR clearance, you need to work out a route to your destination, which could be in the north of England or Scotland, through one of the most congested bits of airspace in the world. You have, my friend, been dumped at Detling in a big way, and a long way before Detling. So while planning the flight, you need to anticipate your onward route into the UK and determine whether you will remain inside controlled airspace under IFR or proceed outside. If you leave controlled airspace but wish to re-enter, for example, if you've not filed high enough to remain in controlled airspace at the UK-French border, I will explain this in the next scenario. The second scenario is where your route takes you out of airspace and back in. This airway in Wales and the northeast of England is notorious for this. You're flying along at, say, flight level 100, and you hear the controller say,
"You've left controlled airspace. My service terminates. I suggest you call London Information."
or it might be Scottish Information or Western Radar. You now don't have a clearance to enter controlled airspace, so you must remain outside. My normal response is to ask the controller to give me a traffic or deconfliction service and a clearance to re-enter. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. If they don't, you have to choose between calling London or Scottish Information and renegotiating a joining clearance, or remain outside, dumped at Detling again. Normally, obtaining a new clearance is not a problem since your flight plan will still be in the system, but, as I explained earlier, you need to request the onward clearance in good time, since coordination is required between London or Scottish Information and the relevant ATC sector. The third scenario is the most common, where the controller drops you out of airspace a long way before your destination. This is where the expression dumped at Detling originated, as people inbound for Cambridge, Elstree or Fair Oaks were being routinely dropped out in the Detling area with up to 60 miles of some of the most complex airspace in the world to negotiate. For those of us trained in the UK, that's a tough enough assignment. For a visitor, it's begging for an infringement. To be fair, PPLIR Europe have raised this issue with the UK authorities over the years, and there seems to be a better recognition among controllers that they need to get us closer before dumping us. But also pilots are being more robust about asking to remain in the system for longer. But to be able to do that, you must be conscious of where you are and the nature of airspace around you. You need to compare your clearance with the airspace ahead and be ready to say,
"I would rather remain in controlled airspace,"
when cleared to descend. Once you're out, you need to apply the knowledge I've tried to impart in the first two videos about airspace and services, and also my getting in and out video, which is also linked in the comments, always bearing in mind that we don't have the sharp dividing lines between IFR and VFR you may be used to. But the really important thing, which I can't emphasize too often or too much, is that London and Scottish Information cannot clear you through airspace. You're responsible for negotiating your own transits. Once out of the IFR system, units controlling airspace outside of the en route network will probably not have your flight plan, and even if they did, it would not mean that you can cross the airspace. The first thing they'll say on first contact will be remain outside controlled airspace, and that instruction remains in force until you have a clearance which uses the words November 1 Alpha Bravo is cleared to enter. That was explained in more detail in the airspace video. One last difference thing. One of the results of our decision to leave the EU is that the UK airports are not licensed for RMP approaches to LPV minima. That means that many of our RMP approaches have only LNAV minima, but some have LNAV VNAV. However, LNAV plus V will still show, and you should be reassured that while EGNOS is not available for LPV, it works just as well as it always did. So you have the same technical assurance of a good signal as anywhere else in Europe. EGNOS works here, it just isn't licensed. The CAA's Skyway Code is an excellent, simple but comprehensive document which goes into much more detail than I can here. And the Airspace and Safety Initiative has many helpful articles, both about flying in the UK in general and also highlighting particular issues and hotspots. Links to both can be found below. The last video in this short series is about the permissions you need to fly in, out and around the UK. See you there.